illustri ospiti, di cui uno assente, perché in questo momento Dario Guarascio sta facendo il seminario al sesto piano, perché ha vinto il concorso come ricercatore di tipo B nel Dipartimento di Economia e Diritto, e infatti mi devo scusare, ma dopo, quando il rettore va via, andrò via anch'io, perché devo andare al Consiglio di Dipartimento, che tra le altre cose deve appunto votare per la chiamata di Dario Guarascio, quindi mi perdonerete. Per cui sono particolarmente contento che lui oggi sia qui. Voglio esprimere il benvenuto mio e della scuola a tutti quanti voi che siete qui, e soprattutto tutti quelli che ci vedono da lontano. A warm welcome to you, Professor Dubashi. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. Due parole per presentare molto brevemente la scuola. In questo anno accademico noi abbiamo 93 allievi iscritti alla scuola, 85 appartengono ai nostri corsi di studio, e i rimanenti invece 8 sono iscritti ai dottorati di ricerca. I secondi hanno diritto soltanto all'alloggio gratuito, invece gli altri hanno anche l'esenzione delle tasse universitarie e eventualmente anche una borsa di studio. Nelle residenze alloggiano in questo anno un totale di 68 allievi. Stiamo realizzando, ed è quasi completata, la realizzazione di uno studentato per 240 posti, posto, scusate il gioco di parole, tra noi, tra il luogo dove ci troviamo ora e la città universitaria. Ci saranno molti spazi e molti servizi dedicati agli allievi della scuola e agli altri occupanti. È prevista una palestra, mensa, biblioteca e aule. E gli allievi della scuola vengono da molte regioni d'Italia. Oltre il Lazio, quest'anno registriamo studenti dall'Abruzzo, Basilicata, Campania, Emilia-Romagna, Marche, Molise, Puglia, Sicilia, Umbria e Veneto. Quindi copriamo tutto il territorio nazionale, isole comprese. I nostri docenti si dividono in 3 categorie, che sono i Senior Research Fellows, che sono 36, Junior Research Fellows, che sono 39, e Honorary Research Fellows, che sono 9. Abbiamo 3 convenzioni con per la mobilità degli allievi, con la Normale di Pisa, con l'École Normale Supérieure di Parigi e con l'IMBL di Monterotondo. Abbiamo un programma didattico molto ricco. In particolare vorrei farvi sapere che quest'anno il nostro corso interdisciplinare ha avuto come tema Homo Faber, passato, presente e futuro. Abbiamo poi seminari dedicati ad ogni classe accademica. Gli allievi della nostra scuola frequentano un corso di lingua inglese con un docente madrelingua, e ogni anno producono un lavoro di ricerca e un approfondimento individuale. A partire dall'anno scorso, dal 2007-2018, i nostri allievi hanno aderito alla Rete Italiana degli allievi e delle allieve della Scuola e degli Istituti di Studi Superiori Universitari, che ospitiamo oggi, anche se via streaming, per questa conferenza che è stata organizzata dagli allievi della nostra scuola nell'ambito di un ciclo di conferenze dal titolo Post-Human Enhancement. Io vorrei ringraziare molto i relatori, anche Dario in contumacia, che hanno accettato di essere con noi oggi. Voglio ringraziare soprattutto Armando Angrisani, che è l'allievo della SAS, delegato al ciclo di conferenze alla quale appartiene quella di oggi. Please allow me to thank in English Professor Dubashi, express my gratitude to you for his presence in this conference today. I already told him that I have a big regret, that is, I will have to leave this conference with the rector, because I have a department board meeting, and we have a few things to do, and as I already told you, we also have to vote to hire Dario Guarascio in our department. It's a duty, but in this case, let me say, it's also a pleasure for me. Vi ringrazio molto, vi auguro una conferenza positiva, utile, che vi possa arricchire nelle diverse dimensioni del vostro sapere che la scuola cerca di coltivare. Vi ringrazio molto, passo la parola al magnifico rettore della nostra università, che però è anche il presidente della scuola e che oggi accogliamo in entrambe le sue vesti. Grazie.
Grazie, ringrazio il direttore della scuola, il professor Ciccarone, per avermi invitato ad essere qui. È un piacere, voglio rivolgere un caloroso saluto a tutti gli studenti della rete che oggi sono virtualmente qui presenti. Un caloroso saluto e un augurio per il loro presente e per il loro futuro. Special thank to Professor DEVDATT DUBHASHI, full professor at Chalmers University of Technology, and thank you for having accepted our invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here. And un saluto al coordinatore di questo ciclo di conferenze per quanto riguarda la Sapienza, ad Armando Angrisani, che ringrazio per il suo impegno. Poche parole sulla Scuola Superiore della Sapienza, ha già detto bene il direttore. Io voglio solo dire che per la mia esperienza e la mia convinzione, per tutti gli studenti italiani che partecipano a queste scuole superiori di studio, è un'opportunità unica di crescita della personalità, che è quello a cui tendiamo, non solo ottimi specialisti nel loro campo, ma anche, consentitemi, facendo un paragone con i medici, buoni generici, in grado di avere una visione complessiva, nei limiti in cui questo è possibile, nella complessità della realtà, nella complessità degli approcci scientifici. È importante avere la possibilità di confrontarsi con le varie metodologie, non avere un'ottica unidimensionale e ristretta, che poi rischia di portare anche ad errori metodologici, comportamentali e anche di valutazioni complessive. Questa è una ricchezza unica che nella scuola vogliamo, in tutte le scuole simili in Italia, si porta avanti come discorso e possibilità, un ampliamento complessivo. Queste tematiche che vengono affrontate da studenti di tutti i rami, di tutte le nostre facoltà e dei nostri corsi di laurea, sono argomenti importanti. Quello di cui parlerete oggi è un argomento veramente di grandissimo interesse, che coinvolge tutti gli aspetti tecnici, aspetti scientifici, ma anche e soprattutto aspetti di tipo sociologico, economico, politico, filosofico. L'ottica complessiva va affrontato un problema. Lo sviluppo di qualcosa di così importante per il cambiamento del nostro modo di vivere, come l'introduzione che abbiamo avuto della rivoluzione digitale, ha cambiato il nostro modo di vita. Ce ne rendiamo conto solo se facciamo un piccolo salto indietro a 20-30 anni fa, per vedere in che maniera profonda si è modificato il nostro modo di comportarci. Ma pensate anche a pochi anni, pensate all'avvento dello smartphone, come ha modificato il nostro rapporto col PC, col computer, come il computer ha modificato il nostro approccio ne dico una, dato che siamo all'università, con la ricerca bibliografica. Chi l'ha fatta in anni precedenti sa, sono cambiamenti profondi che, essendo continui, diventano inavvertiti, ma dobbiamo ogni tanto, penso, fare il punto, anche per immaginare il futuro. Un futuro che per certi versi è già presente, non ci rendiamo conto, che verrà cambiata la sanità, verrà cambiato l'approccio con i malati, la telemedicina è una realtà, potremo essere controllati a distanza, questo eliminerà file, prenotazioni, cambierà il mondo del lavoro in maniera drammatica. ma drammatica se non saremo in grado di gestirlo. E per essere in grado di gestirlo dobbiamo avere questa visione complessiva. Ecco, io penso che l'obiettivo di queste scuole sia quello di contribuire a dare a ragazzi che hanno voglia di impegnarsi e che hanno anche le qualità per impegnarsi un approccio complessivo e di aiutare a formare quindi una classe dirigente italiana, europea, internazionale, perché poi parliamo ormai a livello aperto, che sia in grado di gestire la complessità del futuro. Ecco, questa è la finalità, su queste cose mi volevo soffermare e voglio fare a tutti veramente gli auguri perché non solo la giornata di oggi sia, come sarà sicuramente, una giornata interessante e piacevole, ma anche perché i vostri studi siano un'occasione interessante e piacevole, vi mettano in condizione di affrontare con maggior conoscenza e quindi con maggior libertà e maggior serenità il vostro futuro e di essere quindi utili al nostro paese e mi permetto di dire anche a livello più ampio, a livello internazionale, ne abbiamo bisogno molto in questo periodo. Auguri a tutti e buon lavoro, grazie.
Ringrazio il rettore e presidente della scuola. Passo la parola a Armando Angrisani. Vi chiedo scusa anche a nome del rettore se purtroppo ci dobbiamo allontanare. Il tutto sarà registrato e quindi avrò modo poi successivamente di recuperare. Grazie tante. Ok, c'è ora.
Ringrazio il rettore e il direttore per essere intervenuti. Questo è il primo appuntamento del ciclo di conferenze post-Human Enhancement organizzato dalla Rete. È il secondo ciclo di conferenze di questo tipo. Quello dell'anno scorso aveva come tema l'Unione Europea e abbiamo avuto qui la Cartaglia e l'anno scorso in questa sala convegni. Vabbè, non c'è più. Ah, per la registrazione, sì. Ok. Bene, vi do il benvenuto a nome della Rete. Dicevamo, questo è il primo appuntamento del ciclo di conferenze post-Human Enhancement. Ce ne saranno altri il 29 aprile a Lecce e il tema sarà collegato a questo, si parlerà dell'impatto delle nuove tecnologie sul mondo del lavoro, mentre a maggio a Pavia il 17 e il 23 ci saranno due appuntamenti sull'editing genetico e tutti questi appuntamenti saranno resi disponibili online, in streaming, quindi vi invito a seguire la nostra pagina. La parola chiave di oggi è quella è la parola singolarità, che ha sicuramente diverse accezioni ed è un concetto che è stato anche popolarizzato dalla fantascienza, quindi un concetto che a noi tutti è molto familiare. Si può parlare sicuramente di singolarità sia tecnologica che economica e uno dei primi ad introdurre una distinzione tra questi due aspetti è stato il professor Dobashi nel suo recente articolo Singularities and Cognitive Computing. Quindi spero che troviate interessante questi due interventi e lascio la parola al professor Panconesi che introdurrà l'ospite. Grazie.
Okay, so let me switch to English so that we can move on to the, let's say, the core of this meeting. So it's a pleasure to introduce Professor DEVDATT DUBHASHI. So DEVDATT, he graduated in computer science some time ago at Cornell University. So now Cornell University is a famous university in the United States. So just to give you an idea, the number of professors of Cornell who received the Nobel Prize is 33. 33 Nobel Prize winners in the faculty. 3 of which are professors now. Then also there are other important scientific prizes that have been awarded to Cornell faculty, in particular in computer science. So there are several Turing Award winners, and the Turing Award is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for computer science. So now DEVDATT famously graduated with a thesis on p-adic numbers, which I was never able to understand what they were or what it meant. So then after graduation he moved to Europe. So he's a native of India. His name, if I recall, means the man who speaks 2 languages. But in fact he speaks more than 2, so you can you can try him out. So then he moved to Europe, to Max Planck Institute for Informatics, then to University of Aarhus. And now he's a full professor at Chalmers. And in recent years he has moved on from algorithms and complexity to artificial intelligence and bioinformatics. So it's a great pleasure to have him here today, having speak about the impact of real or unreal or imaginary of artificial intelligence for society at large. So last thing I want to mention is that DEVDATT is an enthusiastic football fan, and in particular is a great fan of Ajax. And Ajax yesterday famously won a great game. So we should all congratulate him for the great victory of Ajax against Juventus yesterday. So please give him a round of applause. Okay, so the floor is yours. I think you have to use this, you know. Dopo. Ok. Is it possible to...
So thanks very much for the introduction. So I should say that more than me being responsible for Ajax victory, maybe it's my son, who is much more of a football fan. In particular, he's a big fan of Totti. So he's very jealous that I came here and I might actually meet Totti. So thanks very much for the kind introduction by Professor Panconesi. It's a pleasure to be here also because, and to Armando for inviting me here, and to all of you for coming here today to this event, which is, I think, one of the very important discussions that one needs to have about the new technologies and the promise of AI and machine learning versus what impact it will have on our lives in everyday society, and in particular the theme that has been chosen by Armando for this event, which is the economic singularity and this particular aspect of the post-human enhancement. And this is a topic that needs a discussion which involves, on the one side, the science and technology people from computer science and other related disciplines, but on the other hand also social scientists from economy, economists, sociology professors or researchers, and philosophy, as was maybe mentioned by the rector during his speech. So it needs a really multidisciplinary perspective to talk about these on this topic. So that's how I'm going to proceed today. So I'm going to start in the beginning. The first part of my talk is going to be more giving a very broad overview about some of the state of art in AI and machine learning today. And then at some point, I will switch from that to the economic perspective about what impact this has on the economic consequences on society at large. So let me start at the very outset by let's go back in history to where it all started. And this is Ada Lovelace, and so she was, of course, a pioneer of computer science. But even though she was a pioneer in many ways, when she talked about the analytical engine that she worked on with Babbage, she said that she was very clear that she didn't think that this machine, miraculous and wonderful that it was not capable of doing anything more than what its designers, namely herself and Babbage, told the machine to do. So that was her quote, "The analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It just does what it is told." And of course, this is a traditional perspective on what computers can do. This is what we all normally think of computers as following instructions that we write from them. But then there was a very revolutionary change of perspective, which perhaps more than anybody else is due to Alan Turing, who is the founder of computer science and is in his very short, tragically short life, he had several great ideas, and one of those ideas was that machines could think. So he was perhaps the first person who actually conceived of machines that could think just as humans beings could think. So it was a very revolutionary thought, and he was, of course, very far ahead of his day. But this is his vision that is coming to fruition today, and that we will see a few examples of and give us pause for thought. The word artificial intelligence itself actually originates with another of the pioneers. So this is John McCarthy, who used to be a professor at Stanford. And he originated the term for the research that he wanted to conduct. And he was a little optimistic, because this whole idea of artificial intelligence goes back to a workshop that he organized in 1956 with a small circle of his colleagues and friends. And the proposal that he had for his workshop, he said that a few of these people working over the summer would be enough to solve the problem of artificial intelligence. So I was a little optimistic as it turns out, but again, this was a very pioneering perspective, pioneering thought that he was pushing forward here. So this is where this whole thought about AI and machines thinking originates. These are some of the pioneers, and we can have a much longer discussion on that. But let's fast forward now to 1996. This is the famous encounter between man and machine. Garry Kasparov, regarded by many as one of the best players of ever in history of chess, versus the IBM machine Deep Blue. And I'm taking this example. So this is an example of chess. And the reason I picked chess as an example is that this is one of the things that when we talk about human creativity and originality and thinking very deeply and so on, we think chess is one of the typical examples that we believe requires creativity and deep thinking and something truly human to do. And so this is a very good benchmark to measure whether machines can match up to humans. And in fact, as it turns out, in this case, the first match, Kasparov won in 1996, but the very next year, he was handily defeated by the Deep Blue computer of IBM. And he didn't take this loss very well. So there was a very picture of him as a very bad loser just after this match. So he really accused it of cheating and so on. But now it turns out that he has come around, and he accepts that machines are capable of these victories, and he's a very big champion of humans and machines working together. But this was a turning point in some of these in this whole view of how we view machines as capable of being creative and intelligent in themselves. And then we can go to 2016, where there was another famous encounter between the man and machine, and this was between on a game which is less well known, but called Go, which is an ancient Chinese game. But this is considered by many people to be much more difficult than chess, and it was thought by experts that this was a game in which machines would have a much harder time at beating humans. This is another game where, again, people think that human creativity and insight and intuition is very important. And that was always regarded as such by all the great champions and masters of Go from centuries that have been playing this game. But in this encounter, when the champion at this game, Lee Sedol, was pitted against the DeepMind computer AlphaGo, it was a completely decisive victory for the machine. It was a very humbling experience for the human champion. He lost 4-1, and he really didn't have any chance of beating this machine. So it was another dramatic demonstration of the power of modern computers at tasks that seemed originally to require really human creativity and intelligence. Now, there was a big difference between these two victories. even though they were both man versus machine, there was still a big difference. So the one on the left, which was the victory of the Deep Blue computer over Kasparov, that was an example where, in retrospect, people would have said, yes, okay, maybe that's not so surprising because you use the power of the computer. So they really hand-coded a lot of the knowledge of chess collected from all the games of chess ever played, extensive information from openings, and really deep involvement of chess experts. So they really hand-coded all of this into the computer and used the massive computing power of the computer to play against the human. On the other hand, the victory on the right is completely different, because in this case, eventually, there was no hand-coded rules about how to play the game. And in fact, at the end, there was no human input also. At the beginning, there was some human input, just like they had done for chess, but eventually they were able to get rid of any human input whatsoever. And this machine from Deep Blue, from DeepMind, from Google, DeepMind AlphaGo, it learned to play this game entirely on its own. So it was only given information about the rules, but it was given no information about good strategies and so on that have been discovered by humans playing for thousands of years. So it started from absolute scratch, or tabula rasa, as they would say, and within a few hours, it learned by itself to play the game, inventing all the strategies that had ever been devised by humans for thousands of years, and it came up with its own new strategies as well. So there's a big difference between the two, and what is happening on the left would be called today, in retrospect, some people call it good old-fashioned AI, because it was really hand-coding of rules, whereas the one on the right is the machine really learning by itself. And this theme, we'll come back to this. This has very important consequences, implications for the economic consequences that we're going to discuss later on. So this was a major difference between how the machines are learning to be intelligent. It's a very different, completely different approach to what was happening before. So what is this happening? So very quick overview now about the state of art of machine learning and so on. And this is a good timely event that happened, namely Professor Plankonesi mentioned the Turing Award, which is the highest award in computer science. It's like the Nobel Prize in computer science, and this was awarded, the most recent award for 2018 was for deep learning to these three people. And this is for their contribution to the deep neural networks as one of the greatest advances of modern computer science that has made breakthrough progress in long-standing important problems in computer science, such as vision, speech recognition, natural language processing, and so on. So there were breakthrough discoveries based on this technology. And so in recognition of this revolution, these three have been awarded the Turing Award. And as we can see, this is just a pictorial representation of what a deep neural network looks like, and that this is the basis for all these breakthroughs in these important application areas that have happened. And why is this happening today? Well, one can say that this is really a result of the convergence of many different technologies. On the one hand, data sensing acquisition technologies that have resulted in a much richer source of data than used to be possible before. Amazing increase in computing power. This computing hardware revolution is still ongoing, and combined with novel algorithms and software frameworks. So all of these things happened at the same time, and all of these coming together was responsible for this sudden explosion in this area that happened over the past, say, 5 to 10 years. Now, in machine learning, one can, roughly speaking, say that there are three major paradigms of machine learning. There's something called supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So what I'll try to do, instead of getting into a detailed description of each of these, I'll just give illustrations of some examples of these types of learning from examples that we all can recognize and relate to. So let's start with the first one, which is supervised learning. So supervised learning is the process where you get not only the data, the raw data, which is represented by X, but you also get some annotation information together with this raw data, and you use these two together in order to build a model that is able to make predictions in the future. So let's take an example to make this more concrete. So this example is something that we can all relate to. So this is speaking in different languages, translation. So now you can, in fact, as this picture suggests, you can use Skype or any other application like this that you want to, that we all use every day in our everyday lives, and you want to talk to your friend in China. You can talk here in Italian, and the other person there can talk in Chinese, and there will be a seamless translation from one to the other. So this technology is already there. It's still being perfected, but this is pretty much available, this kind of technology. And this is an example of so the other example is Google Translate. We use this every day. You have something from English you want to translate into Italian, you can just put it into Google Translate, and you will get a reasonable translation. It will not be perfect, but it will be very serviceable. It will really give you more or less the idea what this text was talking about. And it's extremely useful. It's useful for somebody like me, even though Professor Panconesi claims I speak more than 2 languages, but I have a very great need for something like this. Say in Sweden, we often have to write research proposals, and you can write that in English in Sweden, but you have to write a little bit of it in Swedish for the popular public. So that's part of every research proposal. And even though I've lived there a long time, my Swedish is still somewhat shaky, and so what I use is Google Translate. That's much better than me for converting the thing I want to say in English into Swedish. So this is a technology that is extremely useful and practical in everyday lives, and so it's a revolution in NLP. But this is an example of supervised learning, because what is used in order to produce this technology is a combination of things, but the most important thing is the availability of what is called a parallel corpus. So this means you have available to you data which is the same information in several languages. So you have the same information that is in one language and at the same time in the other language, side by side. And that is what is plugged into this learning model and is able to achieve this translation that we all are using. And in this particular case, this data, for example, in Europe, it's one is very fortunate that there are very good sources of this data, because, for example, the European Parliament has all its proceedings in all the European languages. So this is an example of a parallel corpus. You have the proceedings, the same information available at the same time in all the European languages. And you have another such example is the Bible. So again, the same information, the same material, but it's available in all these languages at the same time. So this is the parallel corpus that is at the heart of technologies that Google Translate. And for me, this is an example that to demonstrate that whatever else, especially your current government says, the European institutions are not totally useless. This is an example that European institutions can be useful. And the same for the Bible. Although this is maybe controversial to say this very close to the Vatican, but this is perspective from somebody coming from Sweden. So another example where this technology is used and will be available very soon, and already in some places, is self-driving cars. So this is an example that is particularly important for us in Sweden, because in Gothenburg, where I live, we have Volvo. This is the headquarters of Volvo, and Volvo has created a new company entirely for autonomous cars called Zenuity. So this company is developing technology for these cars, and every once in a while there is a vehicle like this that goes around on our campus, and it goes completely autonomously. So it's still restricted to some little segment on the campus, but that segment does include public roads. And so this technology is almost there. And this is another example of the use of supervised learning, because what is the data that goes into the algorithms that lie behind these self-driving cars is these algorithms of vision. And what you need there is not only the images which are captured by cameras mounted on these cars, but you also need annotation from a human. At the moment, you need the human to annotate which are the cars, which are pedestrians, which are cycles in these images. And this is the example of the training data that the algorithm for self-driving car needs. So this is another example of supervised learning, because you have to give it this kind of data to learn how to recognize objects when it's driving. So self-driving cars and Google Translate and NLP, these are examples of technologies that are going to make a big impact in our everyday lives. And the technology behind this is supervised learning. And this technology is now to the point, it has developed, it has matured to a point where Andrew Ng, who is one of the modern gurus of machine learning, he has led, it has caused, he has invented the slogan that AI is the new electricity. And the reason he uses this is that, or the reason for him to coin this motto is that he says, just as electricity transformed industry after industry 100 years ago, AI is going to do the same. And so this supervised learning technology is mature enough that it is now virtually all industry across, whether it's transportation, manufacturing, energy, smart cities, all of them are being transformed by this technology. So that's why AI is the new electricity. And so that's a picture that AI is transforming across all sectors in industry. Now, unsupervised learning is an example where you have the raw data X, just like in the previous case, but in this case there is no annotation. So you don't have you don't have things like the parallel corpus, or you don't have labeling of objects in images like you had for the vision example. You just have the raw data, and there is much more of this than you have annotated data. And so what can you do with this kind of just raw data? Here's an example, just to illustrate as an example. Suppose you have a large amount of text. For example, again, we can take this example of European proceedings, which are very dense and they go on for pages. And you have this huge repository, or, you have documents like that, and you would like to quickly know what these things are talking about. So can you make automatically a quick summary of these documents? That's illustrated in this picture. That from all this vast trove of documents, you want to make a quick summary. So this is an example of an unsupervised learning task, because you just have the raw data, there is no annotation, and you need to give this as the output. This kind of technology is also developing, though it's not yet as mature as the supervised learning case. But this will be developed, and maybe in the next few years we might see more examples of this kind of technology in our everyday lives. Now, finally, let's get to the example with the Go program, that the AlphaGo that was developed by Google DeepMind. So this is an example of what is called reinforcement learning. And the setup here is, unlike in the previous two cases, this is a setup where there is interactive learning. So there is an agent, so in this case the chess playing machine, and the environment. And in the case of the chess or the Go machine, the environment is the opponent. And so the agent takes an action. In response, the environment gives you a response which leads to a change in state, or it can, the way you think of it is that it gives you a reward. So in the chess or the Go game, you think of the reward as something that happens not immediately, but after a delay. When you win the game, that's a reward. It's you get plus points for winning. If you lose, you get punishment. You get negative. And so this is the paradigm of reinforcement learning. Can your agent learn under this kind of interactive environment? And it's very interesting to note that this idea of learning in this fashion actually was anticipated by Turing. In Turing's original work in the 50s, he actually talks very close, in words which are very similar to this modern notion of reinforcement learning. And so the AlphaGo Zero program that DeepMind built was, this reinforcement learning technology was the heart of this technology. And as we just commented, the suffix 0 says that this program actually was able to learn how to play this game without any human input whatsoever. So it just learned on the basis of playing games against itself and using this reinforcement learning paradigm to update its strategy and to play better and better as it just kept playing against itself. So, and not only did it play well at one game, it actually, the same program was able to play many different games, including chess and shogi and other games. So it's not just tailor-made like the Deep Blue machine was tailor-made only to play chess. But this one is a general purpose machine. You just tell the rules of the game and it can develop the strategy to play that game. So it's a very powerful technology, and the response from Garry Kasparov and from Lee Sedol in response to what happened after the game showed that they acknowledge that this program is actually acting intelligently. It's showing creativity. It's creating something new that no human had ever played before. So it's perfectly capable. It has demonstrated ability to show intelligent, creative behavior. So now you can say, well, one can start thinking now about the implications of this technology. Where is this going, and what is it happening? The next step they're doing for even more complicated games, which I don't know anything about, but is very popular amongst younger people, these video games like StarCraft. And soon, maybe that will start beating the best human players at this game too. So what are the implications for this? Now, you might think that this is a little, yes, all this is interesting, and it's a curiosity because it's playing games, but what does it have to do with real life? So let me just show now as an example from real life.
Hi, I'd like to reserve a table for Wednesday the 7th.
For 7 people?
It's for 4 people.
4 people when?
Next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
So one is a real restaurant, the other is not a human.
So after 5 people, 4 people you can come.
How long is the wait usually to be seated?
When, tomorrow or weekday or?
For next Wednesday, the 7th.
Oh, no, it's not too busy. You can come for 4 people, okay?
Oh, I gotcha. Thanks.
So this was an interaction between a real restaurant, and the call was not from a real person. The call was made by a computer. And this interaction between the computer, the machine, and this restaurant is an example of a human talking in real time with a computer. And as the example shows, what was being demonstrated here was the ability to make a reservation in a restaurant. And it's not completely straightforward because there are unexpected questions. As you saw, the person at the other end was a Chinese person, and there's the accent and the way of talking, there is a difference, and the computer has to be ready to respond to these things. And there were unexpected interruptions when she says how many people, when, and so on, and the computer was able to respond. So it's quite a impressive feat of technology that is being used here. Again, a combination of the things that we've talked about before. And so when you have examples like this, people have been wondering what implications does this have now if you think a little ahead. And the first thing many people have think about in this context is that some people call it super intelligence, that this is the computers taking over. They're exceeding all human intelligence. So we saw that in the case of chess and Go, that actually happened. In the case of the call to the restaurant, it was performing at human level, this conversation. So is it the case that these robots are now poised to just take over and eliminate us humans? So you have all these scary scenes, and also you have in movies, the one on the right is a famous movie involving a very well-known Swedish actress. Well, so here's my personal take on this, that I have to calm people down when they start talking like this, and to point out that even in these two cases that we saw, they are very impressive, but still you should remember that, say, in the AlphaZero case, it's applied to games where there are very clearly defined rules. The objective is very clear. There is full information. It's easy to score the position and so on. So it's still a very limited setting. And the same holds in the case of calling this restaurant. Even though it looked very impressive and it was able to tackle some unexpected occurrences, it is still a very narrowly defined task. It's not a full general purpose conversation between humans, and the underlying technology behind that is not really something that truly understands language or truly understands human emotions and other things. It performed very well at a very narrowly defined task. So I have to calm people down and to say that this is really still very far away from anything like general intelligence or super intelligence. It's not really the same thing. So people sometimes misunderstand the underlying technology when they they jump to these kinds of very premature and alarmist conclusions. But on the other hand, the same technologies that we have seen, they have very concrete and real implications for another issue, which is automation. So what these technologies demonstrate here is that the real consequence is for automation of tasks that humans were performing before, and they can be replaced by machines for very precise, well-defined tasks. So now this is the question that we would like to talk about for the rest of my presentation. So what are the implications here? So some people argue that it doesn't have that strong implications for this economic singularity either. And the typical argument is, for example, the first argument is the same as what Ada Lovelace, it was Ada Lovelace's argument. She says machines can only do what they are told, and so therefore they can't really displace humans from jobs because a human has to tell the machine what to do. Now, as we've seen, that argument doesn't hold anymore. When you go with machine learning, well, you don't have to tell exactly what to do. That is, the machine is learning automatically how to do the task. Another argument, which is an elaboration of that, is the argument from a famous philosopher, so this is Michael Polanyi, not Carl Polanyi, that may be better known in social science. So his argument was that it was something called tacit knowledge. So he says sometimes we know how to do things, but we can't really explain it. For example, when you ride a cycle, you learn how to ride a cycle, but you can't really explain how you exactly learned how to balance yourself. And so his position was that we know more than we can tell. And so this is also an argument that's sometimes used to say that because we have this intuitive knowledge of how to do things, which we can't put into words, we cannot use that to tell a computer how to do things. But both these arguments, they're really refuted by how modern machine learning works, and the examples that we have seen with AlphaZero, for example, doesn't need either of these two things. And the final, another common argument that people often make is that, well, it doesn't matter if you automate some of these jobs. This is like all technologies. All technologies have had this development that when new technologies come up, then some jobs are eliminated, some people are displaced from what they were doing, but new jobs are created, and so those people can find new jobs. So you can say the same here. Well, maybe it might automate you from some jobs, but then maybe you can go over and start. There will be new jobs that this new technology creates. But this is also something that one has to really look more carefully at, because it turns out, the point is that the new jobs can also be automated. So there is really the point about AI and machine learning is it's such a powerful general purpose technology that there is no place for any job to hide. Any job that you think about can be subjected to automation, and we'll just see a few more comments on that in a moment. So it's a question that now has started to be studied carefully and empirically by economists too. So this is a summary of studies by two MIT economists. So the first study by Acemoglu and Restrepo, so they have been asking this question of what is the economic consequences of AI, and they do recognize that AI has two countervailing effects. So on the one hand, there is the displacement effect, because when a job is automated, then people are displaced. They have to do something else. But there is also a productivity effect, because when you introduce AI technologies, you do make things easier. You can carry out the same task more efficiently, and so there is a gain in productivity. And you can create new jobs. So there is a productivity effect as well. So the question is, which of these two is going to dominate, and so on. And this question is still, the jury is still out. You need more study on this. But in their study, which was carried out for the US, they say that at least their preliminary conclusion is that automation increases the output per worker, but it reduces the wage and it reduces the share of labor. So in other words, it is actually having this job displacement effect. And perhaps we will see more systematic studies of this kind coming out. And the other study by the other MIT economist who is very influential in this area, he has carried out a number of studies that show that one of the clear effects of this technology, AI technology, is what is called job polarization. So in other words, what happens is that the people who or the jobs that are not affected by this technology or that benefit are either located at the very high end. So if you're doing very high scale jobs like high tech people, then their wages and their productivity increases. So it's good for them. And on the other hand, at the very low end, when you have jobs like gardening or carrying out certain kinds of very taking care of elderly and so on, those jobs which are low paying, those jobs are also not touched by this technology. So you have this job polarization in the sense that the very high end and the very low end are okay, but everything in the middle is impacted negatively and hollowed out. So it hollows out the middle and it creates the polarization. That's his conclusion from his studies so far. So these studies are, I think, very important given all the changes in society and that we see around us every day, and the impact of AI and these, if it goes to worsening these inequalities, this is something that somebody should pay attention to. Now, going back to the Palani Paradox, which is, as we remember, saying that, well, it's summarized in this slide. So the first response, so this summarizes a bunch of responses from economists, and in particular author, who is this MIT economist who has been studying this question. So in the first paper that he wrote on this topic, he invoked Palani's paradox, and he says that, well, AI cannot really automate everything because we don't know the rules. It's the tacit knowledge argument. We don't know the rules, so it's not going to be able to automate everything. That's what he said in his first paper. But then very quickly, after a while, he realized that that was mistaken. And he says that machines can learn from human examples, inferring the rules that are not explicit, or that are only specified tacitly. And so he slowly changed his position when he understood the technology behind AI and machine learning better. And so finally, in the third quote, he says that engineers, they develop machines that attempt to infer these tacit rules from abundant data and applied statistics, which is machine learning. So finally, he came to the realization from his original position, where he thought there was an objection to automation, to the realization that in fact machines could learn the rules that humans sometimes use tacitly or only tacitly or implicitly. But in fact, he didn't go far enough, because the final quote there is from another economist who is based in Britain, and he realizes that in fact this argument should be taken even further, because it's not the case that the machines can only learn the rules that humans use. The machines actually learn new rules that no human uses. And this was what happened in the AlphaGo game. Not only did the machine discover all the human strategies that had been played for thousands of years, but it discovered new strategies that no human had used in the thousands of years before. And this has implications for automation, because now you can see machines developing rules that have not been thought of by any humans. And so that really increases the scope for automation. This opens the roads to automating even more than was thought of by all these economists before. So the Palani paradox is really completely overthrown by these developments, and the economists have finally realized, or slowly realizing, the full implications of what AI technologies can do for and have implications for the economics. So here's a quote from the same AI guru. He says that if a typical person can do a mental task with less than a second, then you can probably automate the technology. So this is a rule of thumb that he is giving based on his experience, and he gives several examples. So this is again showing that the scope and the general purpose nature of this technology, that it can really get into any area and any arena you want to talk about. And at the moment, the state of the art is such that if this task is simple enough in some sense, that the human can do this with, say, just 1 second of thought, or with not too much complex cognitive effort, then you can definitely automate it. And he's being conservative here, because we know that even more complex cognitive thoughts, like you need to play this AlphaGo or chess or Go, can be automated as well. But this is a rule of thumb on impact in everyday jobs. And so there is a specter haunting the world. What is going to happen to jobs? Are we going to be left with no jobs in the future? And here are some books that I can recommend for you to read. So these are good. They have good perspectives on this question. And down at the bottom, I have a quote from somebody who has become a bestseller recently, which is the Israeli philosopher Yuval Noah Harari, or he originally historian, but now he's a philosopher. And he says, this is something for provoking economists. He says, the greatest problem of the 21st century economics will be what to do with surplus people. Because you have too many people, you don't have enough work to do. What are you going to do with them? And the same message is also in this other new book, which I can recommend. It's called AI Superpowers. It's written by Kai-Fu Lee, who used to be a top person in Apple's speech technology. And so in this book, he has two themes. One is about the contest between the superpowers, which is the US and China. And his prediction is that China will win. But you can read his book and see why he says that. But he also talks about a lot in this book about the threat of automation. And his prediction is that, well, 40 to 50% of jobs within the next 15 years will be completely automated. And so if this figure is true, then you can see that this is it's a huge disruptive shock to the system if you have this kind of thing happening. And then if you have 40% or 50% of jobs disappearing, you need new jobs of the same magnitude to counter that effect, or you have to do something else. And that's a question that is worth thinking about. This is the question of the singularity, the economic singularity. And on the right, which is a figure that doesn't look, you will not be able to see that very well, but you can read it in his book. But what he has done there, he has charted out, he has made a chart about the kind of jobs that are in immediate danger, that's going to be automated away immediately in the near future, and other jobs which may not be automated right away, but in the near future will slowly start getting automated. So the jobs at immediate danger and the jobs that will be in danger in a few years from now. And he classifies them also according to the physical effort and the cognitive effort. So some jobs that we see are going to be very easy to automate are things like cashiers and checkout counters and things like that. Those are jobs that we already see disappearing. If you go to a supermarket in Sweden today, you don't go to the manned cashier, you have automated checkout counters. And similarly for cognitive efforts, for example, a category which is very in clear danger now is a category of lawyers. So there used to be a whole category of lawyers at the lower end whose job was simply to scan legal documents in order to identify the kinds of contracts. It could be business contract, it could be a technology contract, and so on. And this was done manually by legal professionals at the bottom end of the legal profession. And those jobs, for example, are being automated away. So the legal field is being disrupted by this technology. And it used to be thought of as a complex cognitive task, but as you can see, this is a task that one can automate. And his perspective goes even further than this. So he says we are actually underestimating it when we think of it like this. It's not that 40% or 50% of currently existing jobs will be automated, but it could be much worse, because you might have completely new ways of solving problems that you were not doing before. So that job might not have existed, but you have machines doing things in a way which didn't exist before, and so a whole category of tasks will be automated away. So that's even more disruptive than simply a currently existing job disappearing. The attack might come in a very, very much more unexpected manner. So these warnings are really coming out from a number of quarters, and as you can see, this is well worth the effort to study more carefully with a discussion between AI and technology people, and on the one hand, and economists and social scientists on the other. So winding down towards the end, since the theme was post-human, we can go to the final concluding remarks that going beyond the economic singularity and so on, what are the effects in the, and so here is a quote from the same Israeli philosopher or historian Yuval Noah Harari. So he says in one of these books that, for example, because of AI technologies, this is an example he gives, saying that it's some kind of post-human future, because he says in the future, what he recognizes correctly is that very major changes will happen because of the convergence of, on the one hand, AI technologies, and on the other hand, biological technologies. So because in the end, if you put sensors on your body, you can record all the hormones and metabolites and chemicals that are moving around in your body. And yes, in principle, if you believe in the mechanistic worldview, well, everything is just a result of chemical and biological processes inside your body. So he says, well, if you can measure all of it, and so now these new sensors allow you to implant various things inside your body. You can measure, you can make a measurement of your chemicals inside your body, and then maybe using that you can calculate your emotional state. Say you're very depressed because your girlfriend just left you or your boyfriend dumped you, and because of these measurements, the machine can recognize this. It can sense the state of your mind and then play the appropriate song for you to calm you and to give you solace and so on and so forth. So that's Yuval Noah Harari's take on this post-human future. You can read more of his provocations in his book. But actually, I think for my last slide, I would say that he actually didn't go far enough. This is a little bit, on the one hand, it's a bit too speculative, because yes, it's true that in some sense that chemicals and so on are I mean, in the end, we are all mechanical devices of some sort. So in principle, yes, if you can measure the chemicals inside your body, you could potentially do this, but this is very far away from what is possible. And this is not a limitation of AI or machine learning, it's a limitation of understanding biology. We don't understand the biology at all enough well to be able to tell by measuring metabolites what your emotional state is. I mean, this is very far away from any kind of understanding we have of biological systems. So he's being extremely speculative here, on the biological side. So that's, but on the other hand, he has not taken the developments that are happening in biology seriously far enough, because what you can do again, and this is a powerful combination between AI and biology, but not one that he has thought about, but I think is going to be very important, namely that now in biology you are able to, there are very powerful technologies in biology, and one example is the CRISPR-Cas9 that you may have heard about, which allows you to edit the DNA of, well, for example, this happened in China recently, they edited the DNA of babies. So if you're able to edit the DNA, then you can create, you can really create a post-human organism by doing that. You get something which is, and now you combine it with AI, because you can know what to edit, what should the edits be in order to achieve a certain task. That's a combination of the AI technology together with biology that has much more profound consequences than the one that Yuval Noah Harari was talking about in the previous slide. So this kind of combination of AI and biology technologies will be very important, fundamental consequences for the post-human future. So with that, I can with that I can conclude and stop and say that there's a very important topic for us to think about, not only economics, but more generally about what AI technologies can do for the post-human future. Thanks a lot.
So, I'd like to thank Professor Dobashi for his talk. And are there any questions?
I have a question. So you say before that the AI may, you mentioned that it could decrease the numbers of jobs by 40 to 50%. So that means there will be 40 to 50% people with a decreased power of buying new goods. So at that point, what would be the meaning, or would it be good to produce goods, with a less expensive, then people cannot buy them because they don't have money.
That's exactly. That's a very, very good question, and this is the kind of question that people need to ask. And I don't have the answer to this question. This is only a question that one needs to think about. And so, as you said correctly, if there is such a huge displacement of jobs and people, there is a huge population that is without jobs, that is without jobs, and if you don't do anything else, without any buying capacity, then how is that going to affect the economy? I mean, current free market economy depends on there being producers and consumers, and you have to find this equilibrium and so on and so forth. But if you don't have consumer power, and this is a very classic theme in Marxist economics, for example. It's a very classic, not only Marxist, but Keynesian economics. They have this underconsumption aspect, which is, if you don't want to go into, if you want to avoid Marxist analysis, even mainstream analysis with the Keynesian people have considered this possibility. When the demand goes down, then you have to do something else in order to stimulate and create artificial demands and so on and so forth. So this discussion has been going on in the economics profession before. But this will be, what happens because of this will be that it will be much, much more dramatic. Unless you do something else, this is a much more dramatic version of that. That this leads to underconsumption on a much more dramatic scale unless you do something else. And what you can do, what is the something else? Well, some people say there will be new jobs, but as I said, that is very questionable. There are many objections to that also. Other suggestions that have come up recently, people have been talking about the suggestion of a basic income, for example. So if your economy is very productive, maybe you can you can offer basic income to everybody, and people can use that in order to live a life and do other interesting things they might want to. But again, the question is that feasible? Is that good enough? What are the implications? And the other implication here is that if, on the one hand, some people are displaced from jobs, but on the other hand, people who own these technologies, who own the robots and the productive, there is going to be some kind of even more massive concentration of power if this happens. So, in some sense, these classic Marxist themes, the Marxist analysis has always been about the concentration of power and the owners of capital versus the labor, the labor theory of value and so on. And this kind of makes it much starker. This makes it much more dramatic. I mean, if everything will be automated, the people who own the automating technology, they're going to be much more powerful. And the underconsumption, that is going to be much more magnified. So these are questions, I think, which deserve to be thought about and analyzed, and I don't think there are any answers whatsoever. This is a question for research.
Do you think it could be one of the major limits to the development of AI? Like, if we don't find a solution like this, could it limit?
Well, I mean, that's also hard to answer, because it could be a limit if you say that because the AI technologies, you might ask, who is developing these AI technologies? It's people like Google and Facebook, these big corporations. So if their power consolidates, then of course, I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything to stop them if they have some way to keep increasing their both economic and other power. So there will be are there going to be limits on that? So that depends on how the economy pans out. If there is some limit to, if they cannot keep increasing their share of wealth and power because of the general economy as a whole, then maybe yes, there will be a limit. But the limit, these technologies, the limits on these are to be found in these big corporations which are currently in the current arc of the technology. They are the ones who are the major players in this game, not. So it is an interesting thing that all the many of the modern developments, like you see in AlphaGo, they came from Google, not from universities. So technology is being really driven in these big corporations at the moment. So whether there will be limits to their power and so on is, again, it's a very interesting question. I don't have any answers to that.
So, I have two questions. So I'm not an economist, so everyone is very naive. But so what I feel is like AI is becoming like a really powerful tool, but we are not using it to answer the basic
Yeah, so that's a very good question, very good point, that when you have these very powerful technology and so on, you should use it for doing important things and not for frivolous things or for, of course there's going to be people in the business and corporate world who want to use it to make a profit, so you want to sell more things and so on. So they're of course going to have those incentives. But as you said, from a societal perspective, you should use it to solve more important problems that are, like healthcare in Africa is an example. And to be fair to Google DeepMind, I should say that they actually do have that perspective. I mean, the founders of Google DeepMind, they are people with some vision that goes beyond these things. And even though they put a lot of resources into AlphaGo, that was because they wanted to just show the power of the technology. But in the end, their long-term vision is what you were talking about. So the founders of Google and AlphaGo, one of the things he's trying to say always is that now that we have done this, we've shown the capabilities, we want to use it to solve the real problems. And for example, healthcare is one of the top of his agenda. So he has been working with, or Google DeepMind, they have started working, for example, with the NHS system in Britain in order to see if you can improve NHS using that. And many other people, they have, even within Google, there are groups within Google who have been addressing these problems that you mentioned in Africa. I mean, can you use these technologies to create some cheap solutions for people in Africa for drug delivery, for giving them access to markets to sell their goods and so on. So there are people who have this perspective that you're talking about, which is to solve the more important problems for mankind and those things. And yeah, so I would agree with you that we should be thinking about using these technologies to solve those kinds of problems. And this is again where it is important that in the discussion and in the analysis you have this societal perspective, which requires more than, for example, if you just let it to the market to solve its problems, as you see, then of course there will be an incentive to use the technology for more immediate profits in various businesses and so on. And the African problems, for example, may not be something at the top of anybody's agenda from the point of view of a pure business proposition. But if you look at it as from a societal perspective, where so there has to be this kind of societal perspective that is important, and to direct the AI technologies towards problems that are, as you said, the important ones for humankind, the larger problems for humanity. I agree with you that more should be done in that direction.
So we know that AI is more powerful in some senses, slightly more powerful than human mind. It's faster, it can train this data faster. But what are the human mind strengths compared to AI? Like, is there any way that we can learn what AI things cannot learn that way?
Yeah, so that's a deep question. I don't know, again, the final answer. But for example, I can give a simple example to show that what you're saying is true, at least today. For example, chess. We use the chess example a lot in all the discussion. If you ask, I can ask people in the audience now, who is the best chess player in the world today? So what would be your answer? What is the best chess player, the strongest chess player today? Who do you think that would be? Anybody want to guess? The strongest chess player today on earth? Sorry, Magnus Carlsen. So yes, especially if you ask this question in Sweden and Norway, they always say Magnus Carlsen but it's actually not true. So any other? The other answer is you might say that it's the Alpha Zero program, and probably I don't know what happens if Alpha Zero plays against Magnus Carlsen. It's very likely that Alpha Zero will beat Magnus Carlsen. But Alpha Zero is not the strongest player either. So in fact, it turns out that the strongest chess player today is the combination of a machine and humans. So a combination, just a few people who are at relatively, not grandmasters at the highest level, but quite well versed in chess, together with just a desktop computer using a computer program. This combination of humans and computers is actually more powerful than either the human alone or the machine alone. So this is just a metaphor to show that at least today, the combination of human and machine is the most powerful technology. And this is not limited only to chess. You can imagine that this will be the case. For example, a doctor looking at a patient. today a doctor is limited because, well, if you get a patient and you have a lot of data. You can have genomic data, metabolic data, health records, and so you have a vast amount of data available for the patient. And for the doctor, it's very difficult for them to process this data and make a diagnosis. But if you have a computer assistant, which has been tried out, so IBM had this Watson machine that was deployed in such projects, then this combination of the doctor and this assistant is very powerful because the machine can find exactly the right data points relevant to the particular patient. It can digest the information and provide the summary to the doctor. And then the doctor really has a lot of experience that you can use together with this data to make a better diagnosis. So this is another example which is much more concrete to say that today from the healthcare perspective, from a the best combination is a doctor together with an assistant which uses AI technology. This is a much more powerful combination. So these are two examples that you can easily point to today in today's world. What happens 50 years from now, one doesn't know. I mean, maybe, for example, then in the case of the doctor, perhaps the machine by itself might be better than even the doctor and machine combined. But today, this is the case. I would say that the combination of human and machine is the most powerful technology in many areas.
So, are there other questions for the professor?
Has it been tried to fit like a machine learning algorithm with economic data like market rates, since there are a lot of factors that are in these kinds of processes, which are the outcomes?
I mean, this is very, so in fact, this has always been done. So there is, I mean, economists, this is not new because economists, they've used all kinds of statistical models before and put data in to develop various analysis. Now, of course, the technologies are more powerful. So it's, for example, people use it to analyze, financial transaction data you could use it to detect frauds. You could use it to say what investments follow the stocks and say what kind of investment.
Has it brought something new in the field, or it's just like more powerful?
I mean, of course, it has moved the field forward in the sense that now you can get much better predictions. You can improve the predictions, and so people are using it to, on the one hand, understand economics, basic problems of economics better. Other people use it to invest in stock markets and get a higher rate of interest. So many of these people, hedge funds that make big profits on stock market, they're using these technologies. That's what they use to get ahead of everybody else. So even though the market is not supposed to be giving you signals and so on, they're able to extract signals from by analyzing this data. So they've been using it in many different ways, and it has there has been a quantum jump in the methods that were being used previously compared to what they're doing now.
So I have a question, and we talked about self-driving car, and a problem related to this technology is the absence of a human agency, someone to blame when there is an accident. So how can we deal with that? Do we need to reshape our ethical categories?
Yeah, so that you pointed to the very important fact that a big limiting factor in deploying the self-driving car technology may not be the technical problem, as it could be the legal and juridical aspects of it. And so, so again, there's no clear answers. I mean, there was a recent case a few months ago in the US where one of the Uber cars, they ran over a person and killed a person. And so now the question is, who's going to be? So that was a famous case. There was another case where, in some cities, some restricted areas of the cities, they got permission to drive these self-driving cars. So then they had to create a special, to get these special juridical permissions to make this, allow the self-driving cars to drive in these cases. So this is a completely open area, and many people are saying that these problems will be more difficult to solve to get the self-driving technology out in everyday life. So probably there will be a gradual transition. I mean, for example, on highways, on dedicated highways with trucks plying goods, when there's less of such chances for accidents that involve humans, this kind of thing will be easier to first have, and then maybe you could have again some limited residential neighborhoods where you can get set up special permissions for these things. So I think that will be how this technology will slowly get deployed. But to get it deployed to a case where you can order a taxi in Rome and sit in a taxi, that's very far away. Both in the technology in Rome, if you look at the drivers, that's going to be very hard for a self-driving car to navigate currently, and even more difficult in India. But those are technology problems. But to deploy them in city scales would be, as you said, the legal and juridical aspects will be much more. The ethical thing, I mean, I don't know. Some people like to claim that these are major problems in ethics, and they invoke these trolley problems and various puzzles in ethics that are known. If the self-driving car, typical example, they say is the self-driving car, when they see a pedestrian takes a decision to go this way and kill somebody else, or injures the driver, I mean, which choice did you have to make, and all of these questions. But to me, those discussions are, I mean, that question has nothing to do with self-driving cars. You make that kind of decision too. So these ethical problems and puzzles are, I don't see why that's particularly special to self-driving cars. And so I think that's invented by philosophers because they want some other example to discuss their ethical theories.
Thank you. Other questions? So we can thank Professor Dubashi, and as Professor Ciccarone told, Guarascio will come in I think in 10 minutes, because he had a very important academic appointment in this faculty. So we can have a short coffee break, and we'll see here in 10 minutes or in a quarter of hour. So thank you. Il secondo ospite è Dario Guarascio, ricercatore all'Inapp, e passo la parola alla professoressa Lombardi per l'introduzione.
Okay. Good morning again. So, I am introducing Professor Guarascio. He is head of the unit tools and methodologies for skills and labor market transition at the National Institute for Public Policy Analysis. He is going to discuss a relevant topic in the field of knowledge. Particularly, knowledge can be studied and investigated under several perspectives. And now we are going to discuss with Professor Guarascio this topic, knowledge issues, related to some theories, starting from the economic theory. So, is going to present some relevant authors and scholars during the time. Thank you, Professor Guarascio.
Okay. I don't know if does. No, but I don't think this is amplified. So does this? Okay. Well, this is better, I guess. So, sorry for being late and for not attending the previous speaker, and I apologize for that, but I read some of his articles that I appreciated very much. So, and thanks so much to Armando Grisani and for the school for inviting me and for inviting Inapp and giving this speech. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and indeed it is also an opportunity of sharing with you some of the ongoing research that Inapp and our unit is conducting around the broad subject of digital platforms, and more broadly about the let's say technological impacts of the ongoing transformation on both quantity and quality of work, but also on the
organization of work and on the use of knowledge in the workplace as well. What I'm going to do in this brief presentation, how much time? 25 minutes, 20, I don't know. Yeah, in this 25 minutes is to try to go a little bit beyond some of the rhetoric that is more and more in the debate, both the policy one as well as the academic, concerning the ongoing technological transformation. Most of the things that we have been told are new, are exogenous, are unavoidable in a way, are not new. Indeed, if we look at what classical thinkers and prominent thinkers already in the 19th century were telling us about the role of knowledge and technology in the capitalistic economy. So I think that maybe I would use this one because, do you think this is working? Okay, well, okay. I can also do without microphone if needed. Okay. So the idea is, first of all, framing properly what we are talking about and what we are frequently flooded in terms of articles, blog posts, newspaper articles telling us that robots overtaking humans are coming, that when everything will be digitalized, there will be no more need for human work, and so we are expected to receive a kind of generalized and global reddito di cittadinanza, let's say minimum income to allow everyone to afford and meet, let's say. This is something that some pundits of the Silicon Valley are more and more arguing concerning the prospects of our economies and of our societies, given the technological change and the research that they are doing in their own companies. But what I will try to share with you, since you are students and you are in an interesting school that is not only an excellent school, but also a school adopting what is, in my opinion, needed to understand something of this issue, about these issues, which is interdisciplinarity, which is using a pluralistic approach, using arguments and theories stemming from different disciplinary milieus, and also using different methodology to really grasp the kind of change we are facing and to foresee in a more appropriate way the potential outcomes of this change and how much uneven this change can be as well. Then I would try to answer a question about another thing that is full of rhetoric and of misleading interpretation, in my opinion, from time to time, which is the platform economy, that, as we will see, is a word that have in itself many different meanings. Then I will show you some of the data and of the results of some ongoing research on digital platforms in Italy. There are also some material that, then, if you are interested in, are available on the web, on the Inapp website as well, concerning the unfolding of digital platforms and attempted taxonomy to describe and to define and to identify the major characteristics of those platforms, reporting some interesting empirical evidence using the administrative and statistical registers that we do have concerning the dynamics of digital platforms. And finally, a focus on the so-called labor platforms. Think at Uber, think at Deliveroo, think at Foodora, all these digital companies that indeed are organizing the selling of goods and services in the real world with physical obstacles, but relying on digitized network in order to organize work and to coordinate demand and supply. As we will see, even within this cluster of labor platforms, there are relevant differences that are indeed very important in terms of job quantity, quality, remuneration, and prospects in terms of job quality. Just to start, the first step that I do think is necessary is again thinking that this stuff is not new at all, that the role, the existential role of technological change and the aim of in a way controlling relevant knowledge. When I say relevant knowledge, I mean knowledge that is important to undertake economic operations, so operations that are economically relevant, that embody knowledge, and the one who rules this knowledge in the end is the game master. So already in the Marx Grundrisse, so in the first definition of what the worker of the capitalistic era was different as compared to the, let's say, artisanal and medieval worker, one who was supposed to control the entire process of production concerning his own craftsmanship, in particular concerning the relevant knowledge attached to this process. Well, with the industrialization and the shift toward the capitalistic economy, what happens is more and more an attempt toward the control of knowledge, besides a tendency toward the fragmentation and the scientific organization of processes. This is also what Adam Smith tells us about the development of industries in England in the 18th century. So technology, knowledge, human experience, intended as the, again, even Hannah Arendt wrote very interesting things on these matters concerning how much the embodied experience that is day by day undertaken by people living within complex organizational environments is what in a way define human beings, differentiate them, and in particular define their social, very social characteristics. So what happens with the development of the capitalistic system is a continuous tendency of technological and organizational means as a very objective of capital towards as I said, extraction, centralization, and control of knowledge, of course finalized at producing more efficiently and more profitably, let's say, the things that are increasingly produced in society from the 18th century onward. And again, is this new, and is the current transformation, let's say digitalization of workplaces, going further with automation, so robots in homes and in workplaces, is this new? Is this something of the 2000s? Not really, because automation is something that is here and is in engineers' projects since the 60s, or at least the 70s for sure, in a very, if you want, at least technically advanced way. And what we are discussing about the digitalization of societies and workplaces is nothing more than a very relevant but still a jump along a long-lasting trajectory, which is the ICT trajectory, started with the microprocessor again at least in the 60s. But as an economist of innovation, for me, this is not so strange, because we do know that once a technological opportunity is set and is here, it can last even 30 years before it became economically attractive, economically convenient, institutionally feasible, structurally feasible in order to be exploited, and so to unfold its own effects on the economy. And that's why we have to be careful with all those rhetorics, you know, now the world is changed, so we have to accept that policies are no longer effective, democracies have to, you know, be taken apart because otherwise we cannot, let's say, let unfold all the socioeconomic benefits of the internet economy, so to say. This is not completely true, because behind this we have very long periods of evolution of these technologies that sometimes, as in the case of internet, for example, are state-driven, because internet has been designed, as Mariana Mazzucato told us, by the DARPA agency in the US, for example. So there are big public investments behind one of the key technologies that is at the roots of what we are talking about. So here I just reported through fundamental quotes, or better, 3 quotes from authors that I really encourage you, if you have time and if you are interested in those things, to read, because these are classics, but I think that those classics are fundamental pillars to properly manage and understand the contribution of current scholars talking about what you can see in present workplaces and in present industries. And so here, Eric Braverman, who wrote a very brilliant book in the 70s called Labor and Monopoly Capital, The Degradation of Work in the 20th Century. And this is a book where, with a kind of visionary take, Braverman was envisaging a lot of relevant changes in the American industries due to the unfolding of ICTs and due to the emergence, which was more clear in the US as compared to Europe in those years, of the computerization of workplaces. And so he recovers some of the key Frederick Taylor's arguments concerning scientific management, saying the manner in which surplus is extracted is very special. By far the most important part of this process is the breakdown of complex processes into simple tasks that are performed by workers whose knowledge is virtually nil. Again, the element of knowledge that comes back here. Whose so-called training is brief and who may thereby be treated as interchangeable parts. In this way, the requirements of production are satisfied not through small pools of highly skilled labor in each craft, but by labor of the simplest sort. Of course, Braverman was thinking at the manufacturing industry in a kind of traditional fashion, but still some of his intuition are, in my opinion, crucial also to understand the possible evolution of the digitalization of production as we are seeing it today. And then we have this, let's say, remarkable book that has been just edited, published by Shoshana Zuboff, a prominent American scholar, is an Harvard emerita of the Harvard Business School. She wrote in the 80s this, again, visionary book, In the Age of the Smart Machine, already envisaging some of the current transformation, but just looking at old computers of the 80s in the American workplaces. And now she wrote this more, let's say, scary, at least concerning the title, book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. But I do think that this is a very must-read for all those who are very interested in these technology-related issues. And so she says, as a result of pervasive computer mediation, nearly every aspect of the world is rendered in a new symbolic dimension as events, objects, processes, and people become visible, knowable, and shareable in a new way. Who learns from global data flows? What and how? Who decides? What happens when authority fails? What logic of accumulation will shape the answers to these questions? This is taken by a paper that anticipates the Shoshana's book that is called Big Other. I really encourage you to read it because it's brief, but there are again some very interesting intuition there. And here you have the final quote that I would like to share with you, which is by Julie Cohen, a prominent law scholar from the University of California, Davis, and she wrote this very interesting piece, according to me, that is Law for the Platform Economy. And she again identifies some critical elements of the unfolding of the, let's say, internet-based economy for example, the very concept of power and sovereignty from a constitutional point of view. And what she says in this part of her manuscript that I have taken for you is dominant platforms resist to international legal order, but they also rewrite the narrative in important ways. Platforms have both territories and population that are not made of contiguous physical spaces, but rather are defined using protocols, data flows, and algorithms. However, they are clearly demarcated spaces with virtual borders that platforms guard vigilantly. Benefits accrue most visibly and predictably to users who maintain permanent and consistent membership. Facebook, Google, and Apple have users' population that number in billions, vastly eclipsing the populations of all but the largest nation states. Of course, for students interested in political science, for example, as you can see, these are very relevant matters needed to be appropriately studied. So, conceptual pillars, an element that unfortunately is inside most of the official rhetoric, the mainstream rhetoric about technological change. Technological change as something stemming from the moon or coming here in an exogenous way and unavoidable as such. while technology is not neutral. As Marx already, or Braverman after him, explained us, the way technology is designed, is shaped, is expected to have effects, is completely within the shape of power relationships as we see them today. And so, of course, in order to design and to promote innovation, you need capital. Capital is unevenly distributed. The objectives of capital are, of course, related to accumulation of market shares, of accumulation of technological competitiveness, besides other things. And so the way, again, technologies come to us as products or processes is already something incorporating a certain set of power relationship, and so, if you want, a certain cultural setting as well. And this is very important to be remembered. These are things that I already said. Remember that another deep concept that even in philosophical terms is very important concerns the fact that these developments that again are intrinsic in the capitalistic very nature are related to the fact that time and space boundaries become rarefied. So one of the effects of the unfolding of the digital economy is the fact that time and space boundaries to production, to consumption, to relationships more broadly are less and less relevant. And I do believe, but this is something that was already debated concerning multinational corporations and their impact on the sovereignty of nation states. For example, in this case, let's think at the problems that there are between the activities of companies as Google or Amazon and many nation states that are complaining about fiscal problems, about the fact that the activities of these companies is not easily put under control, and so on and so forth. So, and not less relevantly, of course, this has a lot to do with the distributional issues, so with the issue of inequalities. Why? Because one of the key instruments to take account of inequalities, to address at least partly inequality, is a redistribution. So is policy action on the side of the state. If the big and relevant players in the economy became subjects who are capable of getting rid of time and space boundaries, or to put time and space boundaries according to their needs, as you can see quite easily, the ability to act and to mitigate unintended consequences on behalf of the state become more and more difficult, okay? And so this is the economic context where these technological developments are taking place. You already know this. The Piketty's book has been quite read and became quite popular all across the world, so we do not need to spend a lot of time on that. But still, let's remember that we are in a context of radical inequalities, and again, this is a retroaction on the ability of nation states to take decisions that maybe may allow technological change to unfold in a more socially sustainable way, let's say, because of course the health conditions, let's use this wording, of our democracies is also affected, and the political developments in Europe, but not only, I think testify this, are also affected by the very uneven distribution of income all across the Western economies, but not only, and the socio-political consequences that is have. These are corporate profits, these are data for the US, but again is in a way the counterpart of what I've just shown concerning wages and productivity. So, here we are at digital platforms. What are digital platforms? Because again, even this concept is a bit abused and is used probably because we are in a phase that things are not so clear, and in particular the evolution is not so easy to foresee. But still, let's try to at least identify the domains in which the term platform can be used with some meaning, at least from an economist perspective. So platforms can be seen as process innovations, so the digitalization of a workplace or of the set of communication between firms, maybe connected one with each other, which can have a significant impact on, for example, the organization of work, the amount of labor input that is needed to do something, the way tasks are organized for a single occupation, or the kind of tasks that are required for one or more occupations. But we also know that platforms, think at Uber, and think at this interesting book called Platform Revolution by Parker and others, platforms are also intermediaries, even if they are not really intermediaries, or at least I don't think Uber can be considered just an intermediary of demand and supply, but for sure these are subjects who exploit in a fantastic way something that was already known in management studies since a long time, the so-called two-sided market effects. So when you have a kind of triangulation with three agents, someone who is again the, let's say, market gatekeeper or the intermediary between demand and supply, you have people who demand some goods and services and people offering these goods and services. You need to have in mind the kind of network structure of the market. You can have, as in the Uber case, that nodes that are providers, taxi drivers, can be also clients of other taxi drivers working for the platform as well. What is relevant to understand from a capital perspective, so from a Uber perspective, think that Uber is going to quote herself on Wall Street, I think, in these days, maybe it happened yesterday or the day after yesterday, I don't remember, but that as more as the nodes of the network markets increase, as higher the value of the network, which of course is a digitized network and is controlled by the platform. So the platform increases the rents that can be extracted and the ability to coordinate in a super efficient way this market, as greater is the number of client and provider nodes entering in this market. Why? It's easy to understand. More drivers, less time to wait for a ride, greater information that allow the algorithm to be more precise and to send taxis in the place where, as a consequence, profits for Uber are maximized, and so on and so forth. So each new node increases marginally the value of the network. Then you have the giants as Amazon, and what happens here is directly related to the thing of blurring time and space boundaries that I told you before. Why? Because in this case you have a company becoming a market. And this is very new even in terms of economic theory. Why? Because we know since Coase in the 60s and in the 50s that the big difference in economics or industrial economics and in film studies in particular was that in market you have prices and hopefully you have something similar to competition. So you have the possibility of having entry and exit, having the maximization of social benefits due to the lower possible price that is the market clearing price, hopefully, while in firms you have hierarchies, you have heterodirection of activities, you have rules. Why? Because what happens in firms is affected by informational asymmetry, by so-called market failures that require, in a way, an organization that goes after these failures and that allow, again, managers to hierarchically organize what happens inside the firm. With a company like Amazon, you have, in a way, an overlap where a hierarchical company, of course, makes herself the market. So what happens is that some companies who maybe want to sell their goods and services in another country or in another market are obliged to pass through the platform, so to pass through a company that at a certain point exert a kind of dominant position. As you can see, this is something that is quite challenging also for competition studies and for competition as a very concept in general. At the end, you can also have that platforms can be considered, and this is something that happens, for example, with BlaBlaCar or with examples of something more closer to what is popularized many times wrongly as sharing or collaborative economy. You can have sharing and collaborative economy thanks to the infrastructures, the digital infrastructures that platforms provide, but still you may have a kind of cooperative condivision of capital, for example. You need not to have a profit-oriented aim of the platform behind. There are some examples, but you have also examples of platforms started as kind of pure sharing platforms, but then becoming profit-oriented platforms, and so no longer considerable a place for collaboration and for horizontal relationships. Okay, I think I can run fast and go rapidly to the data that I wanted to show you. Just to highlight a little bit what can be considered, I won't say new, but for sure striking and deservable of a strong attention. And this is the Amazon case. Well, you have this huge and impressive growth of revenues, and of course the same occurs in terms of global market shares of this company, but you have also some peculiarities. So look at the net income as a share of revenues, meaning the relationship between net profits and the revenues that Amazon accumulates year by year. What is interesting is that it seems that Amazon as a company is less interested in profits as many other big multinational companies, think at Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and all the big multinationals you can think about are. Meaning that having a very little above the, let's say, standard or market level profit you can imagine in terms of very standard microeconomic theory. So having a small margin of profits above what is the zero profit that the market would dictate in condition of perfect competition, what matters for Amazon, and this can work as a signal if you want for stakeholders in a way, what you have is that the very interest of Amazon is increasing revenues and more than those market shares. So the idea is, as a message that Bezos can be thinking of sending to people buying Amazon equities is, look, we have to take over all world markets, or the largest world market as possible, and from there we will be able to extract as more rents as we want. So profits are not an issue right now because we are running toward an objective that is quite clear, and I will show you here another very interesting and updated to 2018 figure concerning the dynamics of net revenues in billion US dollars for Amazon, and look at what is also interesting in this, the segmentation by product of Amazon sellings. And of course you have the online stores, so the virtual market that Amazon is dominating, and this is the lion's share part for sure. But look at other very important services, as for example the AWS, which are web services. This is the very, in my opinion, crucial part of the story because due to the technological dominance that companies as Cisco, as Amazon, as Google acquired during the last 10-15 years, now they really are monopolists and technological leaders in offering some crucial web services that are crucial for all the other companies, if you want, and so are very relevant in terms of market dominance and of dependency of other companies that need to be digitized at a certain point to stay on the market, and they need to pass through these global leaders that have the patents, that have the knowledge, that have the expertise. Again, the issue of knowledge that we mentioned before, that put them in a very dominant and, let's say, interesting position from this point of view. Then you have also the physical stores, the data that it is interesting as well, and that tells us that Amazon is really looking along a multifaceted array of trajectories to increase their market shares. You know about this shop in Boston opened by Amazon that is completely without workers inside, and everything works with the cameras and connection of smartphones of those who get inside the shop. So, of course, this is something that by now is circumscribed at the US and some particular areas, but still it is interesting because in dynamical terms these are very relevant numbers, okay? And so, well, there are some problems not only concerning the economic, social, and political outcomes of such an increasing, rapidly increasing market dominance by these digital companies. But you have also, and I can tell you this being the coordinator of a unit of a public research body, wanting to do research, sound research on these issues, and we are facing huge difficulties. Why? Because these companies are hard to be traced in national statistics, because their operations are worldwide localized, are most often localized in countries like Luxembourg, like Ireland, like, or of course for tax reasons, because they lay offshore globally their operations, and because what occurs in the web is of course very hard to trace. And coming back to the time and space boundaries that I mentioned before, what is going on right now on the web and that can be reconduced to Google operation, let's say, can be completely different to what you can see in 10 minutes. And so building sound time series that in a way provide you statistical pictures that are then treatable is something very difficult from an economist point of view. But this is more important than just, difficulties in doing research, because so far, from the end of the Second World War onwards, we learned that, again, states are there to, let's say, mitigate the unintended social consequences of the development of capitalism, that policies are the key instrument, in particular to protect the fragile components of our societies and to mitigate unintended effects, for example, of international trade. But of course you need statistics, you need numbers, and you need something that inform policymakers in order to act properly in the proper moment and in the proper way. If you have an increasing and crucial part of the economy that is hard or impossible to trace from a statistical point of view, you can see that then the sovereignty or the capacity to act of nation states, but in general of policy actors, is significantly threatened, okay? And here, and now I will conclude reporting some data on digital platforms in Italy, stemming from some work that you can find, as I said, on our Inapp website. You have a policy brief and you have a research report that I authored with some colleagues. It has a multidisciplinary approach, so you have a legal contribution, a sociological contribution, an economic contribution, so it can be interesting, I think, also for a group of students as you are that come from different milieus. And we are trying to do additional stuff. In particular, we are trying to set up a statistical survey and a systematic exploration of both administrative and statistical registers joined with DEVDATT, trying to figure out a little bit better the very economic and employment dimension and the impacts, if traceable, of the emergence of these economic actors. So what we did in the policy brief, a very preliminary and circumscribed exercise, but still interesting due to the object of analysis, which has been the so-called web giants. So we define the perimeter according to the actors that we retained interesting, and that, of course, we realized to have data about. So Amazon, Facebook, and Google, Italy, of course, so the Italian branches of the three web giants that are indeed traceable in our administrative and statistical archives. Then we relied on the Farrell and Craig distinction between capital and labor platforms, even if there is some debate about the appropriateness of this distinction, but still it is quite largely used, so that's why we decided to rely on it. And we looked at Booking.com, Casa.it, and Subito.it, basically platforms active in intermediating demand and supply of capital goods, so homes or every kind of object, or the intermediation of rental of apartments, a bit like what Airbnb does. Let's think that we didn't have the opportunity to access to Airbnb data, even if we are a public body. And think at the impact that just in the last 7-8 years Airbnb has had on our touristic sector. So this is a kind of relevant element to take in mind concerning how transformative, even if from a, let's say, philosophical, epistemological point of view, not that new wave of transformation, okay? And so then I will show you some data stemming from the balance sheet archive that we have called AIDA and the Labor Ministry's mandatory communication concerning new contracts with which we have been able to trace the contractual and employment behavior of these companies operating in Italy, and then some attempted interpretation, even providing you with a taxonomy in terms of organizational setup of labor platforms. So here we compare revenues per employee and wages per employee for Google, Facebook, and Amazon vis-a-vis their relevant sector at the 5th digit, that is the maximum digit of disaggregation offered by ISTAT. And so in a way we are comparing Amazon, Google, and Facebook with the companies that are operating in their very industrial sector. Even if a caveat is necessary, the activities of these companies are very cross-cutting sectors, and so if we were truly to capture their competitive strength, we really need to rethink this kind of comparison. For example, looking at how Google is penetrating in the advertising and newspaper sector. But of course, this presents some methodological difficulties. In general, what you can see is that both the three are really outperforming their counterparts, and this, of course, hints to a very rapid capacity of gaining market shares as well. Interestingly enough, they also increased a lot the wages per employee, the wages that they are providing to their employees, but we will find a quite clear explanation of that in a minute. Here we enlarge the picture and we rely on a larger number of variables, so we have value-added profit, taxes, and social security contributions per employee. What you can see is that there is a very differentiated behavior if you compare the three web giants and all the other platforms. In particular, what you do have is that labor platforms and let's say Deliveroo, or well, we do here just it, unfortunately, because most of these variables were not available for all the labor platforms in particular that are here since no more than 3-4 years, think at Deliveroo, so it's quite hard to find sound data on those. But in general, it seems, and this is quite understandable, they are exposed to a stronger uncertainty. They tend to have revenues that are more volatile. In general, all platforms tend to pay very little taxes as compared to their activities. Concerning social contributions, of course, you have a big issue concerning the kind of contracts that are used, in particular by labor platforms, because as I will show you in a minute, companies as Deliveroo, for example, have a really shadow kind of workforce that can't be traced in any way, and that is most often treated as a group of self-employed, and so upon which the social contribution that is paid as compared to what was supposed to be paid if this workforce was emerging as standard workers with standard labor relationship is significantly lower. Here, this is an interesting picture reporting almost all the labor platforms that we consider, and as you can see, this data refers to 2016, so a year for which we have data also for Deliveroo, PetMe, that is a small platform providing services of animal care and this kind of stuff. What is interesting is the yellow bar, in particular for Deliveroo, Just Eat, PetMe, Casa.it, Subito.it. What you can see is that there is a shift in the relative weight of service costs over total production cost, meaning that, at least on our opinion, much of the labor costs that are incurred by these companies are in that yellow bar, meaning that the degree of flexibility and the capacity of let's say, push downward labor cost as an issue for this company is extraordinary for these small platforms, for example, in the food delivery sector. And this is mostly due to the peculiar organizational setup linked to digital tools that are used and algorithms, but also for the kind of contracts that these platforms are allowed to use. And there are a lot of debate in the UK, for example, and courts have been called to rule out some elements of debate concerning if those workers have to be considered autonomous or not autonomous, but standard workers. Of course, this changes completely the scenario and the profitability scenario for this company. That's why they are defending themselves with all possible means in order to keep the kind of setup that they are relying on in order to provide their services. Okay, and so to conclude, these are just employment data on digital platforms operating in Italy. As you can see, in general, you have a very small employment impact of the operation of these companies. Again, what you have to think about is the element of rarefying time and space boundaries. What do I mean? I was in Dublin until yesterday because I was at a workshop in Eurofound on digital platforms, and I listened to very interesting presentation concerning the way a lot of crucial services connected, for example, to YouTube, to Google, as content control and control of inappropriate images, for example, or inappropriate images or inappropriate comments are radically outsourced, with 100,000 workers in India, in Africa, in European countries, in Dublin as well, working for what happens on the web, but what happens on the web of the Italian Google. So in a web area, let's say, that is directly connected to the revenues of Google Italy, just so to say, but still the workforce that you can trace and that you can attach to Google Italy, at least the directly connected workforce, is no more than 195 employees in 2016. So you can see here how much the emergence and the relevance of this company is pushing further the concept of production fragmentation and of offshoring related to services, not to manufacturing, as we learned since the 70s with the disarticulation of production global worldwide that we do know very well. But the consequences of that are not properly understood and foreseen, in my opinion, so far. The only company that has, let's say, a larger employment impact according to this data is Amazon. Why? Because we do know that the logistics plant of Amazon, we have 4 or 5 of those in our country, employ a quite large amount of digitized workers. You remember the debate on the wearable that are attached to Amazon workers and that control their performance, but that are also useful to feed the algorithms in order to make things more efficient and more predictable, if you want, and maybe threatening of technological unemployment, at least partly, in the next future. But still, you see the difference between Amazon and the other companies. And to truly conclude, here you have the results of the analysis of contracts, so of the mandatory communication of the Italian Labor Ministry, and as you can see, you have this strong turnover for Foodora and Amazon IT Logistics, meaning that where there is a more traceable workforce or a larger employment dimension of the employment related to those companies, you have also a very intense use of temporary agency work, for example, or of flexible work, but within a recognizable in terms of contracts labor relationship. In all the other cases, you can see that it is confirmed the tendency toward a very small employment impact, but still you have an interesting distinction when you look at the three labor platforms related to food delivery that we analyze. So Deliveroo, Foodora, and Just Eat. Why? Because they differ concerning the way they relate with their riders. So with the guys with bicycles that you can see around bringing food in the European and in the US cities, but not only. So there are different organizational setup related to different kind of contracts that are used by these platforms. As I said, all the three have a small group of core employees, mostly related to marketing, management, and app and algorithm related activities. They are most often high skilled and with good contracts workers. They are well paid, but they are a very small group of workers. In Deliveroo, they are, I don't know if Deliveroo still operates in Italy, but until a certain point they were in Milan, but they are completely detached from the large amount of riders who are connected to the platform and to the company just via their app, and they have just maybe one meeting at the beginning to receive the suit and the bag that they use to bring food around, but then they sign something electronically. They are hired with this collaborazione occasionale, or occasional collaboration that legally speaking is nothing in Italy, because it's something that until 5,000 euros per year do not require any real emergence of the subject and of the fiscal activities, apart from a 20% that is devoted like a kind of flat tax, let's say, including everything for this kind of work. And most importantly, they are not traced anywhere. So even the mandatory communication of the Labor Ministry, that is the global register of contracts for the Italian institutions, do not trace this kind of collaboration. So in our case, it has not been possible to trace the activities of these workers. And they are paid by a company that is UK based. So you can see that the organizational arrangement is very, very peculiar. It is different for the Foodora model. Foodora uses coordinated and continuous collaboration, which legally speaking is a more recognizable and defined type of contract. You can find it in the mandatory communication of the Italian Labor Ministry, and implies from 2012 with the Fornero reform a more substantial fiscal and social contribution, let's say, need to on the side of the firm. While the Just Eat model, again, another kind of organizational setup within the same framework of labor platform aimed at food delivery, here there is an auxiliary company, a kind of cooperative, hiring again to exploit, let's say, contractual loopholes or in a way, benefits of using this kind of companies, of comparative companies, maybe let's say light contracts that are less costly and that are very flexible. But in any case, just it relies on this auxiliary company to hire her own riders. So I think that I overfloated you with words, and so I don't think that I won't say much more apart from what I think I've already told you during the presentation in terms also of interpretation. In this slide you have some generic conclusions, but in general I'm very happy to share this. That is something that is completely ongoing even in our mind in terms of reflection and of proper conceptualization of the issue, and not less relevantly of design of the research that we are going to do in order to really capture what is salient for our economy. What we thought was, for example, I can anticipate this, to circumscribe part of our analysis to the restaurants and touristic sector, because we do think that for the Italian economy and for the impacts, for example, on competition and on degree of market disarticulation that some of these companies, as Airbnb, for example, are doing is very important and can get back some interesting hints. We will use tech scraping besides the standard strategies. We will most probably do some in-depth interviews going into these companies, trying to be allowed to interview managers and people working there to learn something more. But I'm here if you have some questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Let's thank our speaker. Are there any questions?
Yes. How do you see the importance of European Union in this kind of argument? Because I mean, you were talking about Luxembourg, Ireland, UK. It seems to me like that we are not in the same team, something like this. And what's the trend? What's the new frontiers? This is the first question. The second question is more like a curiosity. Have you ever used like some machine learning techniques to deal with the statistic part, or you just use like standard ISTAT models?
Okay, many thanks, because both are questions that are on the point and allow me to expand a little bit in an interesting way. Well, let's say there is a paradoxical thing behind the question that you posed, because sometimes we hear, well, these are global companies, their operations are global or at least are supranational, so if we want to do something in terms of mitigation of unintended effects, we need to rely on supranational organization. But then you look at the European Union, you look at how much the European Union has been also a place of fiscal dumping, for example, a place where lobbies, and in particular lobbies related to big and strong multinational companies, are effective in pursuing their own interests, and so in asking for regulations that were suitable for their economic expansion. And so in this respect, I really don't know. I think that the answer is if the European Union stays as it is, it can be, I'm sorry to say, more a threat than a help to do something with respect to the scary development that some of these companies are putting on the table. Why? Because at the end, a potential obstacle can be constitutions, because constitutions are quite binding with respect, for example, of fundamental rights, privacy, and other things. For example, in Germany, due to her constitution and some relevant laws concerning privacy, but not only, Google had to step back with respect to some activities that in other countries completely allowed to pursue. Then what I told you concerning the Irish case and the Italian young colleagues of you who cannot find a job here and go there working, let's say, with more low-skilled staff as compared to what they were supposed to do given their graduation, but still they earn 1,800 euros to do content control for Amazon. Why? Because there, of course, corporate taxation and corporate legislation, and also the very institutional and social context of that country is very favorable for those companies. So as I said, if we would not have a dramatic change in terms of democratic accountability of the European Union, of constitutionalization, and also of, let's say, rediscovery of the European social model, intended as a model that has some social right pillars that are not just declared, but that are in place, also avoiding some activities that these companies are willing to do. I'm not sure that at the end we would not ask for some help from nation states rather than from at least in the European case. Then we will see. I mean, these elections are quite important even in this respect, but still I don't know. Because look, what Julie Cohen's, and that's why I invite you to read her article that is freely available on the web, is that, look, the problem with these companies like Google or Facebook, for example, is that they are more and more behaving like states. You know, the people that is asked to do policies, internal policies, but at the end are internal policies, but that are policies that have effects for our everyday life in all societies. Because Google, on YouTube, for example, they do design their own policies on what is appropriate and not appropriate in terms of images or content. Yes, they look at legislation, but at the end they take their own decision, because the timing and the rhythm of their activities is too fast for regulators, for national and supranational legislation. So when there are meetings between, I don't know, the DG Commissioner on Communication or the Italian Ministry of Industry, Di Maio, for example, and the Google or Facebook responsible, you really see that there is a kind of asymmetry, because these guys have a control of instruments that are now, in this precise moment, more effective in shaping reality. And even if there is something that is not appropriate on this website, the time that is required for a national court or for the European Court of Justice to act, to go there, to file the case and to interact with Amazon, Google, or whoever, have you seen the dynamics of revenues of those companies? This means also ability to act as lobbyists, of course. And I mean, in the US, there is plenty of literature discussing these elements. While on the second point, yes, we do, not yet, but we are going to. And one idea is once we define a register of relevant platforms operating in Italy, we would follow two different strategies. One is the one of deep register exploration, so exploring all the administrative and statistical information that we have both in Inapp and in ISTAT, but also use, let's say, machine learning driven text scraping, going into the platforms, for example, with the aim of capturing those who are more relevantly related to them. So the idea is not only that platforms are important as such in terms of their economic and employment outcome, but also the, let's say, indirect effect of these companies. Because if an increasing number of Italian companies need to go to Amazon, knock to the door and say, listen, would you allow me to sell my goods even through your platform? You can have that at a certain point, the degree of dependency, and so the share of rent that suppliers at that point have to transfer to Amazon is increasing. And this, of course, has impact on institution, organization of markets, labor condition, wages, and so on and so forth. So we have to broaden a little bit the picture, thinking that, okay, these thousands of workers in the Amazon plants for logistics are important, of course. But then you have the rest of the economy that is more and more attracted by the magnet in a way, and we need to understand which consequences are foreseeable from this point of view.
first. Secondly, will there be work for everyone in the future?
Okay, I think I can collect the second one and then.
Okay. And do you think, in a really dystopic view, that these kinds of companies will somehow attach how people will identify themselves with a nation? Like a nation has different kinds of services, transport, work, maybe someday even education. Do you think that someday we won't have like countries, but these kinds of companies that will provide humans what they need?
Okay. Well, the first point is, if you want, is a debate that now is also not that new. So the one that most of the productivity gains, for example, are not in the GDP statistics. This is most probably true. I would say that some labor-saving process innovation occurred as well. So in a way, I think that part of the growth that we are not seeing, in particular concerning productivity, is related to some technological innovation. But we do not have to think at the technology in isolation, and as I said, to be understood, at least in socioeconomic terms, technology must be read within the institutional and socioeconomic context. So the kind of institution, the kind of tax compliance that is asked, the degree of internationalization are all issues that in the end have an impact also in how much statistically governments and national statistical institutes, that at the end are those producing GDP statistics, are capable to trace the true economic activity. Of course, then you have all the story of we are typing something in the browser of Google. In this way, even if we are not remunerated, we are providing food for the alphabet algorithm, let's say. And so this is like value added that is not completely traced, or at least is not appropriately distributed. This is an argument that someone in California now is on the Democrat side is putting forth, if I'm not wrong. So there can be also this element. I do not have an answer, but I think that some of truth is around in all points of view. Concerning the point of no labor future, I do not agree, and I do agree with the paper on singularity that I read. I mean, at the end, we do not have to think in a kind of technicistic, deterministic way as we are observing a machine becoming powerful, intelligent. Maybe this is the case, but what matters are the ends, the economic ends, and what is important for those who put capital and invest in order to generate basic research or a new technology. So, in my opinion, human labor will never disappear, but its characteristics, its condition, its quality, the way it can be organized might change radically, and might change in a way that we don't like. I mean, if you think at the Amazon Mechanical Turk workers, so workers completely polarized, fragmented, atomized, maybe they won't meet their colleagues all along their life, if this is the job that they are going to do all along their life. So this can be a standard way of organizing work, even in terms of relative exploitation. Think at the kind of behavioral incentives that a platform can use organizing work. Uber does it. Uber, the way Uber offers the services to be done to taxi drivers, in particular in some phases of the day when the demand jumps or rises down, grounds on behavioral studies that are designed, even in terms of the kind of message that arrives on the screen of the app of the driver, in order to induce the driver to work 1 hour more, 1 hour less, going in that area or in that other area. There are some studies. I mean, Uber relied on a pool of really important behavioral scientists in this respect. So I mean, my fear is not that will we all stay without anything to do, but which kind of job there will be in the future if power in terms of knowledge, of organization, of access to technological means is so unevenly distributed. This is the very point. Who decides how technology is designed, in particular with respect to work organization? While the dystopian future, yeah, for sure. But I mean, what can be interesting to read with respect to the question that you posed are the pamphlets by some of the anarcho-capitalists of the Silicon Valley. Some of those are big entrepreneurs of the Silicon Valley that are clearly claiming that nations are no longer necessary, that the individuals and the radically transparent individual that is completely traceable in terms of relevant information about his self, his organic conditions, his health condition, his attitudes, his behavior, is what matters to have, let's say, a heaven on earth. Because all the problems concerning inefficiency, coordination problems will disappear. This is something that even Mark Zuckerberg, in a way, put it forth in some of his speeches. But look, I think that the developments that we are seeing today are also the outcome of a trajectory towards, vulgarly, we can think of neoliberalization of Western societies, if you want, where the individualization of services, the weakening of collective bodies and of collective actions in general, the importance of being eradicated on territories is something that has been challenged by the transformation of our societies even before the advent of platforms. Of course, if time and space boundaries are one of the conceptual pivotal elements that we have in mind, these technological developments accentuate significantly those trends. So I have no answers. I do think that, let's say, fantascientific books can be interesting. I mean, people like Asimov, like Ballard, like some others were not just, inventing stories. They were deep thinkers. And sometimes I think that in some of those novels, you find sound social intuitions, in my opinion. And so, yeah, open questions.
So, if there aren't any questions, I would like to ask Professor Dobashi if he has any observation about the talk.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting boundary to, as you mentioned in your talk as well, to see the relationship between the technology on the one hand, the consequences of the economic and social aspects on the other, and the forms of organization. The platform economy is something that is fueled by these AI, machine learning technologies. So this combination is changing the nature of work and economic arrangements and so on, and it's a very important area for study where you need the technology and the economists and social scientists to work together. I was wondering, for example, in your talk you mentioned this European social value. One of the European social long-standing principles is the principle of the welfare state. And the platform economy seems to be directly a threat to the welfare state. And again, how this plays out and what regulatory mechanisms one can put in place to contain these are interesting questions.
Well, I mean, is a little bit as the point that I made before. I think that there are a couple of problems here. First of all, if the economic activities of these actors are not adequately, let's say, regulated in terms of tax compliance, firstly, you do have a problem of resources. I mean, because welfare states ground on taxes, in particular on those paid by big companies extracting the larger parts of value added. In the Shoshana Zuboff pieces, she makes a good point, in my opinion, that is, think at the General Motors era, that in Italy is the Fiat era. You used to have one of the big players of the Italian capitalism, Fiat, which used to employ thousands of workers in physically recognizable places, having a clear impact on local economies, as a clear political consequences of the organization of these companies, but more importantly, with a well-known social pact. Because, of course, a company as Fiat, wanting to make her profits and to gain her market share, need to have an organizable workforce, needs to provide wages which are at least partly capable of buying the cars, so the goods that were put on the market, needs to have a kind of social acceptability of the context in order to pursue their own operation. If you have that the economic big players really do not need to take care about the localization of their activities, what happens in the areas where they extract a lot of value added, you see that the need of social pact, and so the social pact that was at the very origins of welfare at the end. Why do you had the development of welfare in Europe? Because, of course, the structure of capitalism and the way of reproduction was asking for good health condition of workers, capacity of spending. The very risk is that going along that way, these companies are really less interested. And as she was saying, at some point they can also say, look, but we can also maybe provide some welfare, we can organize on our own, we can help states to provide maybe a partly or a totally privatized welfare, maybe organized via platforms, maybe having in exchange a lot amount of data on all the stuff related to welfare. Think at health condition, at what happens in schools. And of course this is scary as a prospect, because again you don't have the strong control of democratically accountable body who decide what is taught in school, how things are done in hospital, who is eligible for something. So I mean, this is an enormous area of debate. As I was saying, I'm not sure that the European institutions are fit for purpose, at least in the current state as they are right now.
So thank you for having joined us, and let's thank again our speakers.